In a far-off land, nestled among rolling green hills and whispering forests, there lived a young goat named Kale. Kale wasn't like the other goats in his herd. While they were content to graze in the same sunny meadow day after day, Kale's eyes were always drawn to the distant, formidable peak known as the Cliff of Courage. It was a sheer rock face that scraped the sky, its summit often shrouded in mist. The elder goats spoke of it in hushed, fearful tones. They told stories of fierce winds, treacherous paths, and the spirits that guarded its heights. No goat had ever dared to make the climb. It was simply accepted as impossible. But Kale didn't see an impossible obstacle. He saw an adventure. He saw a challenge that stirred something deep within his heart. He felt a pull towards that summit, a yearning to see the world from a perspective no one else had ever known. He began to prepare in secret. Every morning, while the others slept, he would practice leaping between boulders, strengthening his legs. He would test his balance on fallen logs and learn to read the subtle shifts in the wind. He studied the cliff from afar, mapping out potential routes in his mind, his determination growing stronger with each passing day. One crisp morning, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Kale decided the time had come. He took a deep breath, nuzzled his mother goodbye, and set off towards the base of the great cliff. The other goats watched him go, a mix of disbelief and concern in their eyes. Some called out, telling him to turn back, that he was foolish to chase such a dangerous dream. But their words were carried away by the wind. Kale's focus was singular, his gaze fixed on the rocky giant before him. The first part of the climb was deceptively easy, a gentle, rocky slope that lulled him into a false sense of security. But soon, the path grew steeper. The solid ground gave way to loose scree that shifted and slid beneath his hooves. Each step was a calculated risk. He had to be patient, testing every foothold before committing his weight. His muscles began to burn, and the first whispers of doubt crept into his mind. The others were right, a voice inside him said. This is impossible. Turn back now before you get hurt. He paused, his heart pounding against his ribs, and looked down. The meadow was already a small green patch far below. Turning back seemed just as daunting as pressing on. He remembered his morning practices, the feeling of landing securely on a difficult rock. He shook his head, clearing the doubt, and took another careful step upward. As he climbed higher, the wind became his greatest adversary. It howled and shrieked around him, trying to tear him from the rock face. It was a relentless, invisible force pushing and pulling at him. Kale learned to use the terrain to his advantage, pressing himself into crevices and sheltering behind rocky outcrops whenever a powerful gust hit. He learned to anticipate its rhythm, moving in the brief lulls between its assaults. The wind didn't just test his physical strength, it tested his mental fortitude. It was a constant reminder of the danger, a voice screaming at him to give up. Yet, with every gust he withstood, he felt a little stronger, a little more resilient. He was no longer just a goat. He was a climber, battling the elements with courage and skill. Days turned into a grueling routine of climbing, resting, and climbing again. His fur was matted with dust, his hooves were chipped, and his body ached with a deep, persistent fatigue. There were moments of sheer terror, like when a ledge he was standing on crumbled away, leaving him dangling by his front hooves over a dizzying drop. In that moment, pure instinct took over. With a surge of adrenaline he didn't know he possessed, he scrambled and clawed his way back to a more solid footing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He lay there for a long time, the rock cool against his trembling body, watching the pebbles fall into the abyss below. That close call changed him. It stripped away his remaining fear and replaced it with a calm, steely resolve. He had faced the worst and survived. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he noticed a change. The air grew thinner, crisper. The rock face began to level out. And then he saw at the summit. It wasn't a sharp, jagged peak as it had appeared from below, but a small, flat plateau covered in a carpet of vibrant, unfamiliar wildflowers. It swayed gently in the breeze. A wave of emotion washed over him: relief, exhaustion, and an overwhelming sense of triumph. He had done it. He took the last few steps, his legs shaking, and stood on the very top of the cliff of courage. The view was more spectacular than anything he could have ever imagined. The world unfolded beneath him like a giant, living map. He saw his own meadow, now a tiny speck of green. He saw rivers winding like silver ribbons through valleys he never knew existed. He saw forests stretching all the way to the horizon, and beyond that, the shimmering expanse of a great blue ocean. He could see everything. He was standing above the clouds, with the sun warming his face and the whole world at his feet. It wasn't just a view. It was a new understanding. He realized the world was so much bigger, so much more vast and beautiful than the limited perspective of his meadow. When Cale finally made his way back down, it was a different journey. He was no longer the same young goat who had left. He moved with a quiet confidence, his steps sure and steady. The rocks and wind were no longer his enemies, but familiar companions. When he arrived back at the meadow, the other goats gathered around him, their eyes wide with awe. They bombarded him with questions, touching his scuffed fur as if to confirm he was real. He didn't boast about his accomplishment. Instead, he spoke of the beauty he had seen. He described the colors of the wildflowers on the summit, the feeling of the sun above the clouds, and the incredible, breathtaking view of the world. Cale's story became a legend, but it wasn't a story about recklessness. It was a story about courage, perseverance, and the rewards of daring to see beyond the familiar. He inspired a new generation of goats. While not all of them chose to climb the great cliff, they began to explore the world around them with a new sense of curiosity. They ventured into the whispering forests, followed the winding rivers, and discovered new meadows filled with sweet clover. Cale taught them that the biggest cliffs aren't always made of rock. Sometimes they are the walls of fear and doubt we build in our own minds. And he showed them that with enough courage, preparation, and an unwavering belief in yourself, you can climb any cliff and discover a whole new world waiting on the other side. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage and adventure.